One of the most common causes of problems in electronic equipment is the so-called dry joint or cold joint. Now these joints are very difficult to demonstrate in an artificial situation like we're in at the moment in this workshop. So this film goes out into the trade and looks at actual dry joints that have been found while servicing equipment. Some of the joints that we're going to look at are so obvious that they can't be missed, while others are very, very difficult to find and involve a considerable amount of the technician's skill. The first joints that we're going to look at tonight is an obvious fault which has sparked, caused a great deal of damage to the circuit board and almost caused a fire, and this has almost totally destroyed the television set.
This is an old HMV model C211 television. It has suffered a burn-up in the bottom right-hand corner of the line output board. This trouble is characteristic fault in these chassis. A plug-and socket set carrying heavy line frequency current becomes dry jointed and arcing leads on to this sort of damage. Even where the board is not burnt, severe damage results, as here where part of the copper track has become detached from the base material. This close-up shows two undamaged contacts on the left. The missing contacts were of the same type.
The first scene that we saw was pretty dramatic. The TV set was almost in flames. The joints that we're going to look at after this are not so obvious and usually just require resoldering. What we're going to do now is go back to that first problem and show how even that sort of burn-up can be repaired with careful work.
All the components around the burnt section were removed and a small piece of new board was glued into place. The various components were reinstalled in approximately their original positions and then hardwired back into circuit. The missing plugs and sockets were not restored. The connections were made by hardwiring between the board and the off-board components, and heat shrink tubing has been used to insulate the joins. This very lively dry joint is also on the line output board of an old HMV C211. This fault is unlikely to cause a burn-up because it has stopped the set from working. A fault like this is not hard to find since it announces its location quite clearly. This is an AWA television with a characteristic fault on the pincushion correction board. The owner of the set called for help before the damage became too great. On the other hand, the owner of this board persisted in watching the soap opera, so he could hear the story if he couldn't see the picture. In the meantime, the dry joint developed into a fully fledged burn-up. The general location of the dry joint on this Chrysler was indicated by the crackling it made while the dust was being brushed off the board. The precise location was found after a lot of prodding and poking and a careful and close-up examination. The whistling noise is caused by the fault. Here's another active dry joint, this time on a Phillips panel. This fault stopped the set, and the hiccuping ensured that there was little chance that the owner would let it run until a fire began. There are two dry joints on the line output transformer of this Sanyo television. These stopped the set, so the owner had to call for help. The same thing happened to this Phillips board. Line output stages and their associated components are prime locations for this kind of trouble.
Some of the joints that we're going to look at now are very, very hard to find. They represent a considerable amount of time and experience on behalf of the technician who's found the fault, and with the aid of this video you will be able to see the sorts of problems that you're going to deal with in servicing electronic equipment. Finding one of these joints, one of these dry joints, after a considerable amount of time and effort is one of the most satisfying things that a serviceman can ever do.
Now we are getting into the range of more difficult dry joints. This one was on the convergence board of an HMV colour TV. A dry joint need not be as apparent as those seen earlier in this film. The granulated appearance of the solder in this joint covers the fact that it was totally open circuit. Then this capacitor on a Rank Arena chassis is open circuit at one end. The dry joint is obvious only if examined with a fairly powerful magnifying glass. This and the following dry joint were found in the same sharp chassis. It's rare to find two fully fledged dry joints at the same time, since one is usually enough to stop the set from working. Both of these joints show the typical granulated surface. Any joint showing this characteristic should be remade as a precaution, whether or not it is already open circuit. Finally, we come to some very obscure dry joints that were found in a CB radio. The first shows a pair of dry joints on a single tiny pad. One joint actually moves under pressure, while the other can be seen but didn't respond to probing. The next pair of dry joints were found on the IF transformer in a similar radio. There's one here and another around here. The tiny size of these joints can be seen from the fact that the three pins all fit within the 10mm span of a miniature IF transformer. This film has shown a representative range of dry joints as found in domestic electronic equipment. You have seen two typical types of failure: clean and obvious cratering, and the granulated joint. You should now know what to look for on any occasion where a dry joint is suspected.